is from Justine is welcome here. Bonsoir à toutes et à toutes ce soir. Merci Justine. So Justine is a member of the Anticapitalist Youth, Jeunesse Anticapitaliste of the new Anticapitalist Party in France. As everybody knows, there's been big struggles for the last 2-3 months. About a dozen one-day strike demonstrations of over 1 million people, and it's a big moment in France. So Justine will tell us about what the strikes are, what the demonstrations are about, the role of the presidential dictatorship in France, right, and the violence of the police, which is pretty staggering, actually, for those people who've been following it. And it coincides, all this coincides, obviously, with the big strikes we're having in Britain as well, which is, so hopefully there's a new mood both in France and in Britain for our struggles for a better world, for eco-socialism and for at least social and economic justice. So anyway, Justine will speak for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll go into a session of questions and answers. Okay, Justine.
Hi everybody. So first, sorry for my English, it's a bit rusted maybe. So I will try to speak slowly and with not too many mistakes, but let me know if it's not understandable. Also, my connection is not quite good, so let me know also if you can't understand me. So thank you for the invitation. So as you said, Fred, in France we have been knowing a wide movement, something that we haven't seen for decades. So it's really something new. But yeah, so I will start with something on the reform to explain why this movement happened, and then I will go on the context, like the more broad political context, and how it can explain that we have this movement. And then, yes, I will explain the movement in a bit more detail and with the question of violence, power, and so on. So first, the reform. So just to set the portrait of what we have in France. So the social security system we have in France, it was created after the World War II by the Communist Party. And so the idea is that we have like this social security system that covers health, unemployment benefits, and pensions. And so the idea is that workers and bosses, both of them pay a contribution for pensions and the rest of the social security, but for pensions, for current pensioners. Pensioners, is it the correct word? Yes, great. And so now the former pension system we had before this reform was that we had to work the equivalent of 42 years of work, and the minimum age to be retired was fixed at 62 years old. And this was changed by the reform. And another thing was that we have special regimes. I'm not sure of this translation, but it's just like for some specific work sectors, which are considered particularly harsh. Like rail workers or nurse or healthcare providers in general, they would have specificities that say that they don't have to work as much as the rest of the population to be entitled to be retired. So we have the former minimum age to be retired and the special regime, which are the two main issue of the reform. Well, there are other things, but these are the two main important ones, especially the minimum age. And so in this reform, the idea is to extend by 2 years the minimum age to be retired, to put it at 64 years old and a maximum of 67, and to delete most of the special regimes to simplify the system. But it's like we wouldn't say it's right, because those rights to have to be retired earlier is something that has been won by the social movements. So it's not like simplifying it; it's just like making it more complicated for the people and so on. And on the argument of extending by 2 years the minimum age, they argue that the system is not stable, and that with the generation of baby boomers, there will be a problem of demography, that we will have too many retired people and not enough people who will work, and so not enough money to pay the pensions. But it's something that is not true. Even like there is an organization which is like supposed to study the pension system, and they said that they maybe in the future a deficit of between 10 and 15 billion euros, which seems to be great, but actually it's not that big. If we compare it to like the wealth of the 42 wealthiest French people, which is 545 billion euros. So what we say is that this deficit that they predict is actually not that big compared to the wealth that is available. It's just like it's a political choice to say we will extend the minimum wage to be retired. So this is one thing. And what we argue also is that we need to share work time and wealth and give work to young people and to women and in general all those precarious people who have difficulties to find a job or to have like a stable job. And if we share all of this, then there's no need to extend the minimum age to be retired. Another argument they have is that life expectancy is increasing, which is true, but actually it's not the case of the disability-free life expectancy, which is the period of time you spend where you are in good health. And so this period doesn't grow. Oh, I forgot to put the time thing, so I don't know how much I talked, but let me know.
Carry on.
Great. So this is about the reform. And so this happened in a context where Macron was elected for the second time. So this is the second mandate. But actually he won the election by a short majority. Because in front of him was Le Pen, who is the far-right candidate. And actually a lot of people started to hate Macron, especially after the COVID crisis, because there were a lot of lies, a lot of corruption, a lot of privilege for the government, for the rich people, and so on. And so for all of this reason, and also because Macron's government, former government and current government passed some laws without asking the opinion. I'm not sure how to say it, but without considering the opinion of the parliament. And so for all of this reason, Macron doesn't have a great, he's not really very famous popularity. I don't know what to say, but well, people don't really like him. So yeah. So we have this context of people hating Macron, and we have also the context of economic crisis that exists worldwide, but also in France with inflation. Well, and last, I just saw a recent figures, which is like 72% of people who have the minimum wage have reduced their daily meal, and 42% of them have delete one of the meal in a day. So, which is something really important that didn't exist in France these last years. And so we have this, and also in 2019, so just before the COVID crisis, there was also an attempt to put a reform on pensions, which actually failed. Well, it was suspended because they said it was because there was the COVID crisis, but actually there was also a big social movement at that moment, with also millions of people in the streets and strikes and so on. So we had this in mind, that the government wanted to put this pension reform in place, and we know it was going to arrive. So we were well prepared to it. All the left-wing organization, the union, and so on, we were all prepared to it, and more widely the population. And so this is how in January we had this big first demonstration with billions of people in the streets. And then in the other days of the mobilization, there were also massive demonstrations and so on. And also in general, this movement has been going on since 3 months, and there's still a massive opposition to the reform. It's still up to 80%, and a bit less of people who say that Macron shouldn't stay in the government and so on. So there's really something going on in the minds of the people. But there are some particularity of this movement, which is the less positive, maybe, aspects of it. Well, we can discuss it if it's less positive or what, but still, it's something that is like we could say that there are massive demonstrations. There is a huge opposition to the reform. But on the other hand, the strikes are not that big. There are not so many people who are in strike on the moment of the mobilization, and also there is no general strike. There is no like the how you say it. I look for the word. The inter-union. They would call for days of mobilization, but which are separated by 1 week, 2 weeks. And so between those two dates of demonstration, there wouldn't be so much actions, and people wouldn't necessarily be on strike at that moment. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that people don't necessarily go to general assemblies, or they don't, like colleagues wouldn't talk so much between each other about the reform, about the government, about the working condition. Same with the students. So it's really something like, it's difficult for us to understand what's going on, because the opposition is massive, the movement is massive, but people don't really organize on themselves. So that's really something complicated to tackle. Yes, this is this. And other characteristic of the movement is
just another 10 minutes. Another 10 minutes.
Oh yes, sorry. How long did I talk now?
No, you got another 10 minutes. You got another 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So another characteristic is the blockades. There are a lot of blockades action, which is something quite new. Like we had some, people blocking the railroad or the train station, or going to to a supermarket and just invade it. So we had this, but it was more rare before. But now we have it quite often, and which is something that is maybe a heritage from the Yellow Vest movement. But still, it's some people, maybe a couple of hundreds, but not so more, that will just go in this moment, but not, with all of their colleagues and so on. So once again, a strange characteristic of this movement. Another thing is the place of the youth movement. Actually, there are many young people in the demonstrations, many of them, but you wouldn't have a part of the demonstration that is completely made of student union or high school groups or whatever. You wouldn't find it organized. It would be young people all spread it all around the demonstration. And again, in the universities, in the high schools, you will have some blockades also. But once again, when you have a general assembly, actually you have maybe how do you say it? A bit less than 200 people, maybe a little bit more, but not thousands as we used to have in 2016 or whatever. So once again, it's you have a youth movement, but it's not as big as it could be. And it can be explained by many things, like COVID, repression, many things, but still. And so yes, it's just to draw the broad portraits of these last 3 months. So we had a first phase, which was more the inter-union demonstration. So these quite isolated dates of demonstration. It was very peaceful. You would have massive demonstration, people everywhere, but you just finish your demonstration, go back home, and that's all. And then you had a second phase of the movement, which was after what we call the 49.3, which is an article that the government can use to force to pass a law. And so the National Assembly doesn't have to vote for the law. So just the government that say this law is now passed, and that's all. And so at that moment, there was a question of democracy, saying that there is opposition to the reform, but the government just doesn't care. Even though the parliament would maybe reject the law, they just passed it. And so at that moment, you enter in the second phase where you have demonstration, but in the night. The night when they passed the law, there were people just in the streets and going from one place to another, being in small group and then joining other groups, which was bigger, but just walking in the streets, which was it was quite weird, because you didn't have much radicality in this demonstration. So yeah, but you had it like quite often. It was each day you have a demonstration in the night with like maybe thousands of people in the streets, which is big, but not as big as the demonstration during the day. And another moment of it was like we had a strike by the, how do you say it, Fred? How do you say éboueurs? The people who éboueurs, you know, the people who
refuse cleaners.
Okay,
refuse cleaners.
So those people, they were on strike, and so you had trash everywhere in the streets, and people would just put them on fire. So you had fire everywhere, but they were not breaking like the bus station or the windows or whatever. They would not break it. They would just put the trash in fire. So yeah. And at that moment, in the second phase, is when the repression rised. That you had more people who got arrested, and also they were arrested, but without any justification for it. So they were just, they were put in a police station, and then they would just go outside the next day, and that's all. And nothing happened to them except this. But still, you have like tear gas everywhere, batons, flashballs, and so on. So this is something that is increasing. But after that, we didn't reach a third phase of the movement when, like we would have, have this self-organization of the people, people starting to think on how you change the system, how you put in place counterpowers and so on. So we didn't have this yet, and now we are not sure on the continuity of this movement, because it's been like 3 months and we didn't have this third phase or radicalization of the movement. So now the next day of mobilization is the 1st of May, which is like in quite a while. And until that moment, you can have like some actions. Like this morning, they were invading like the head office of the biggest industries in France. But you have hundreds of people in there, and that's all. And still, you have like each time you have Macron of one of his minister who go in the city to do whatever he does, and then you have people, coming to this place and shouting and saying Macron should go. So you have this, but still you don't have self-organization, which is once again a bit complicated to understand. And we stopped.
You've got a minute. So
yeah.
You stopped now, are you?
This was my conclusion.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you very much. That was great to give us a picture and a feel for what's going on. And your English is absolutely great. So that's fantastic. We'll be inviting you again. So, okay, that's your timer. So, okay, so it's open for everybody to sort of come in and put a question if you want, or make a contribution. But let's take a few questions first and see if there's areas which you haven't covered which people want to know a bit more about. So if people put their hand up, presumably people know how to put their hand up, and I'll let them in as they go along. Right, I can't see anybody yet. Oh yes, I can see Stephanie, followed by Roland. Stephanie, come in.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much for giving us an overview. My question's really about environmental action that's going on. We've seen reports about, is it in Brittany, where there was really strong police and state violence against environmental protesters at the same time. I just wonder if there's been any link up at all between those protests and what's happening on the streets, although the way you've described it, it doesn't sound as if there's like real organisation that you could identify of any sort ongoing. So I'm curious about that. Thank you.
I'll take a couple of more questions, and then I'll get Justine to come back in. So next one is Roland.
Thanks. So, thank you, Justine. That was very interesting. It sounds from that as though the class struggle in France is much more advanced than we're able to manage at the moment in England and in the other nations in the British state. But what I think that we do need to look at specifically here is the apparent collusion between the British and French authorities, because I'm sure comrades will have heard of the arrest a couple of days ago of the French publisher who was coming to London to attend the London Book Fair, who was arrested at the airport when he arrived by police who immediately asked him about attendance at demonstrations in Paris, and presumably acting on information received from France. They held him for 6 hours under the Terrorism Act. They quizzed him about his views on Macron. They quizzed him about the views of other authors that his publishing company publishes. And then they finally charged him under the Terrorism Act for refusing to give the police the passwords for his phone and computer. He's been released on bail now, but the police still hold his phone and computer. We don't know what they're doing with them. But it seems that the police in Britain have powers that the police in France don't have. And the suspicion is that the French police asked the British police to arrest him to get information to pass back to France. I think it's something that is really vital that in Britain we take up, partly as a contribution, obviously, to the struggle in France, but also in defense of all democratic rights in Britain. This seems actually a really dangerous precedent, the apparent collusion here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot, Roland. That was very important. I'll take Steve from Seattle, and then we'll get Justine to come back in. Steve.
Yeah, hi, Steve from Seattle Revolutionary Socialists. Thanks very much. Great report. So I have a couple of questions. What's the attitude of various left parties or groups in France towards this in terms of how they're organizing? You mentioned the yellow vests, and I'm wondering what overlap there is or connection is to that movement. And has there been much rank and file pressure on the union leaders to actually call a general strike rather than the sporadic strikes? Thanks a lot.
Okay, Justine, are you okay for coming back in now?
Yeah. Thanks for the question and the general comments. On this last question, I would say it's the thing that's less, it makes me less optimistic about it, is that about the unions, you have this interior union that is still strong, like it stick together, which is something that didn't happen. Like I never knew this to happen. Like my parents didn't neither. So we haven't seen it. So I don't know if it ever happens in the French history, but it's really something important now, that you have all the unions that stick together to say we are still opposed to the reform and we will still oppose it as long as it stays. So this is something good, but on the other hand, they wouldn't call for general strike. They would call for mobilization and for mobilization going on, but even in the beginning of the movement, when they called for strike, actually it was followed by some specific sectors, like what we call the key sectors, like the rail workers, the energy. Things like this, and because when those people stop working, then you can see it directly, contrary to other sectors. And in those sectors, you will have more strike than others, but still, it was not. I don't know how you say it, but it's like the basis of the movement didn't push the head of the unions to have like a better, more radical position. So it didn't happen. So because it didn't happen, it would have been weird that the head of the trade union called for the general strike, if when the bases don't call for it. And once again, the bases wouldn't call for it because basically the workers don't organize together because they don't go to General Assembly. So, well, some of them would go, but not all the people who go in the streets would go to General Assembly. So it's complicated to talk about general strike when the people don't organize themselves. So that was one question. And on the comments about the collusion between the French and the British governments and police, I don't really know much on what to say about it. It's just like really, like it made me scared of it. But we had some glimpse of what it could be like before this event of this comrade being arrested by the British police. Like I already knew about like another, like his friend of a comrade or whatever, and she'd been also arrested by the police. Well, she was not arrested, but when she wanted to cross the border, she had to stay at the I don't know how you say it, like la douane,
customs or immigration.
yeah, she would have to stay here like a couple of hours because she was, known to be like an activist in France. So it's something that's like it must be scary, and we need to be like really aware of it. And but it's still like it's the same logics that we used to have. You understand? So yeah, and also because this comrade in particular, like he's a publisher, but he's also an anti-fascist activist, and I think that's one of the reasons why he was, known by the police. So yes, and the other question was about the environmental actions, and so you're completely right. I didn't talk about it, but it's really something big. So you have this organization called Les Soulèvements de la Terre. I have no idea how you translate it. But
the uprising of the earth.
Yes.
Uprising of the planet, yeah.
Yeah, so you have this organization, and with two others that have been leading a mobilization against the construction of sort of water containers, like massive water containers for agriculture. And the idea is that they will pump water in I have no idea how to say it, but they will pump water in the soil to have it like a big swimming pool, and they use it then for agriculture. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Fine, yeah. So this is like an environmental catastrophe, like because it will dry the soil even more, and because we have this episode without any rain, like it's really something that will be a problem in the future. So you have this mobilization, but that's been going on since months, and because another date of mobilization about this issue was called, when was it called? At the end of March, maybe. I don't remember when it was, but anyway. So you have many people who joined the protest there. We were 30,000 people there, which was really big and something that didn't happen in the past on ecological issues. And yes, there was massive repression. There is still someone who is between life and death now, and more than 200 people who got injured. And actually, they spent like 5 million euros just in police equipment, which is more than the cost of the construction they're trying to do. So yeah, and I think that the idea was not that much about this construction, but more about the government showing that they have like the force of the police, and that they would just repress the people who try to get above them. Not sure if it's quite true, but I think it's more like a demonstration of force by the government. But yes, it's really scary about it. And I don't remember which one as the question. But about the organizations, like, so I was saying people don't go to General Assembly, but on the other hand, you have like a lot of people who join the unions during this mobilization, but much more than we used to have in the former mobilization. So people don't self-organize, but they will maybe start to join unions and to join, organizations. So yes, it's something also to take into account.
Great. Okay. Yeah, that's good to information in reply to the answer to the questions there. So we've got another 2 people who put their hands up. Stephen, do you want to come in now? And then I'll be followed by Dave Calloway. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. Good evening, comrades. Yeah, it just seems to me that the significance of this this latest round, if you like, of struggle is it's so significantly political. I mean, we know the meaning of the getting these pension counter reforms through. It's like a project of the European Union political establishment, but especially for Macron, what Macron stands for. And we know that that these counter reforms go back a couple of decades, and it's like a continual struggle. So it seems to fully grasp it, if you look at the political impact, where Macron couldn't get a parliamentary majority to push this legislation through, so he had to fall back upon the 58 Republic provisions that would allow him to push it through presidentially. Now we know that can mean that it means that some of the right-wing parties didn't feel forced to support it because they knew that he could push it through anyway, and that it was only his own head at stake, so to speak. But it's really it seems to me that it's difficult for us at the moment. It's a bit like some of the political significance is a bit like Britain in the early 70s, where the 74 Conservative government, Ted Heath's government, went for during the miners' strike, went for a new election on the basis of who rules, and they lost the election. So there's an element of that in it, but of course with the French Republic, it's got elements of the strong presidential state about it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, next person is Dave Calloway.
Hi. This first point I want to make is this case of Moray. Roland's already talked about it, but I mean, I came back from Paris yesterday, and if he was stopped at St. Pancras, it must mean there was some real collaboration between the French secret services and the English police and people, because we do the passports before we get on the train. So he wasn't stopped at the passports in Paris Gare du Nord, but he was passed in St. Pancras as he was coming through. He just walked through normally. So there must have been some collaboration. It's an absolute scandal. And what's interesting again is the deafening silence of the Labour Party. I don't think anybody, maybe one or two MPs have said something, but there's nothing I've seen from the Labour Party denouncing this. It's absolutely a scandal. Absolute scandal. What I noticed when I was in France with my friends in different places, I was in the south of France in a place called Bellegarde for a little while, and this is quite a small town, several tens of thousands even. And even there had been mobilizations of hundreds and hundreds of people in demonstrations. And that's an absolute new feature, even compared to the previous struggles in the past, is the extent of mobilizations in these small towns everywhere in France. 200, 250 towns being involved. Partly connected with the Gilets jaunes, which was also a feature that they were very strong in the small towns. It's probably a rollover from there to some degree. And then the scale of the mobilizations is very impressive, yeah. But it is true what Justine was saying about the difficulties of the situation as well. It's not as straightforward. For instance, the trade union anti-syndical is actually much more united than the political parties and the political left. Every single political party within the NUPES is divided, often on strategic questions. And it's obviously not clear that Mélenchon and the rest of the left, it's not particularly easy, yeah, between Mélenchon, his ambitions, his project, and the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, the Greens. Yeah, that's a big problem going forward, I think, that differences within the political parties. One thing I would advise comrades to look at is Hugo Pajeta's 10 Theses. I think it's an excellent article about the situation because it actually criticizes some of the simplistic analysis we've seen in the English left press, which talks about revolutionary situations, pre-revolutionary situations, the fact that the leaderships will sell out the workers or already selling out the workers. That simplistic analysis is very roundly criticized and analyzed by Hugo in his article. I recommend everybody to read that article. It's very, very good. There are 2 points I wanted to sort of ask Justine, really, was one on the question of the referendum. There is a possibility, if the Constitutional Court allows it, he's going to make a decision sometime, I think early May the 2nd or 3rd, whether the French public can organise a public referendum on the reform. It would take 4.5 million signatures to have the referendum. That should be, I think, quite easy to do, I would have thought. But the question, what will that mean for the movement? I mean, is it a sort of plan B? Is it something which is going to hold back the mobilisation now? Is it a going thing? The second question, and my friends in Paris and elsewhere already were talking about this week, and they were saying the problem is, at the moment, all the surveys, all the opinion surveys show that the big winner at the moment is Marine Le Pen and the RN, the National Rassemblement. And the problem with this is that she herself does not have a clear line against this reform. She's not firmly opposed the pension reform. It's a very contradictory sort of opposition. You know, she didn't vote for it, obviously, in Parliament, but she doesn't really support a decent pension system at all, in particular not for non-French people. So they're the 2 points I wanted to ask Justine at the end. But thanks very much for the talk, very useful talk.
Yeah, and thanks, Dave. I've got a question as well to Justine, following on from you and Steve. Is maybe I have missed it, but I mean, given that Macron hasn't got a majority in Parliament, he has to rule by decree. He's, you know, the reforms are opposed by 80% of the population of France. I mean, is there a mood, or is it possible to campaign at least for a general election? You know, this government's got no mandate. This government should go. Macron should go. So would that be an axis for mobilisation, which is being considered in France as well? So is there anybody else who wants to come in? No, otherwise I'll ask Justine to give her thoughts on our questions.
Yeah, thanks again for the comments and the questions. Where to start? About the mobilization, the small towns, I just wanted to say something about it. It's like, as you said, it's something that we saw a little bit with the Yellow Vest movement, but it really, it really is bigger than in the Yellow Vest movement. You have like so many people who never been into politics and just now started to, get interested in it, who do their first day of strike, who go in the demonstration for the first time, and all of these people, like, it's completely incredible to see them in the streets and talking about politics, basically. So yeah, that's really something. But on the other hand, as I don't remember who talked about it, but like, the state of the unions and the state of the left-wing parties is that we have to rebuild basically everything, I think. Like you had crisis in, like, how can I say it? Like, people who like have doubts about the direction of the trade unions. They would have doubts about the direction of the Communist Party, of the France Insoumise, like, in all of them, they wouldn't have trust in them, not as much as it could be. And people are like, trade unions, they don't really see why they're useful. Like, a lot of people wouldn't see the use of trade unions. And so, yeah. So I say, for all of these reasons, unions were weaker and weaker these last decades, but now I think that it can be a bit stronger after this movement. So that is one of the outcome. But I don't see the same tendency in the left-wing parties, as you said, is that you have this attempt to have like a sort of unity in the left during the presidential election and after it. Well, not during the presidential election, but during the general election that just followed the presidential election. And so at that moment, you have what we call NUPES, which is New Union, Popular New Union for like ecology and social, well, something about it. And in this, you have the Greens, you have the Communist parties, you have the Socialist parties, and the France Insoumise and some other smaller parties. But that are the full one. And so the NPA, we were asked to join it, but at the end we say no, because there was the Socialist Party and the Greens. but we are still in contact with them. But still, as you said, you don't have this unity that is actually how can you say, like I would say like the people wait for this unity, like they really want this unity of the left, but it doesn't really happen. And I think it's one of the reasons why the far right is actually rising. It's because you don't manage to have like a strong reformist left-wing organization. They don't have it. It was almost it when La France Insoumise was created just before the election in 2017. So this was this attempt to have like this new broad reformist party, but actually didn't reach its goal. And now, so it's still complicated about it. And you're completely right to say that the far right is rising. And the polls also said that if now you had like an election, like the second round of the presidential election, if it was Macron versus Le Pen, then Le Pen would win, which is like really, really something. But yeah, and still we have like to have in mind that we have a bit more than 80 far-right deputy in the parliament, which is something new again. Like we didn't have as many of them. And in then you have like, I don't remember how much they were, but maybe a little bit less than 10 fascist deputy. So yes. And about the other question, yes, I forgot the one. Yes, the one about the like, do we consider general election as something for what is going to happen? We don't talk about it as that much. Like people will be more focused on the, like they were focused on the use of this article, like the 49.3 article that's allow the government to pass the law without the opinion of the National Assembly. They were focused on this moment. They were also focused on the moment where the constitutional committee, which is like an institution in the French Republic, when this institution had to study the pension law and also the possibility of a referendum on this reform law, they were supposed to give like their opinion on it, say, is it constitutional or not? And can this referendum happen or not? And they say no to both questions. So people were still focused on this point, but still they were disappointed on the results. But like there is still expectation on the Republic institution. So once again, something weird, like you have this focus on this institution, but they wouldn't talk about now we need to call a general election, we need to dissolve the General Assembly, and we need to push it for that it happened. So yeah, I think it's.
Thank you. No, that's. I think it answers everybody. So, has anybody else got any questions or want to make some contributions? We've still got some time. Can't see any hands coming up. Tony, Anthony Richardson. Tony, and then Naoki wants to come in after that. Anthony, go ahead. You're muted, Anthony.
Okay. From what at the moment I'm in Lower Normandy and been to demonstrations there over a number of years. And obviously the demonstrations have been dramatically bigger in this recent period. But from what I'm reading in the papers, is that the union membership has increased quite dramatically. And for obvious reasons, the health situation, and in the countryside, it's worse than in other places, but it's also what one reads all over the place. The health situation, the cost of living, it's not as dramatic as the UK, but it's still fairly dramatic. Is obviously there are forces behind people. They've found a place where they can express themselves, I think anyway, which is on the street, obviously, but also into the unions and to some extent. And it's quite the delegations with the unions I've seen have been obviously bigger and so on. And and France is quite different than the UK. I mean, well, I haven't seen picket lines at stations, for example. I know they have been in Paris, but I haven't seen picket lines at stations, and it's a bit different organised, and of course they have to allow a certain level of service and things like this. So it's a different situation, but I would see a big hope in these people joining the unions, and that if the young people are on the demonstrations, and maybe it's not them that join in the unions, but if the young people on the demonstrations get into the unions, that's an organised force. It seems to me that that's quite a dramatic improvement.
Okay, thanks for your comments there. And the next person is Naoki. Come in, Naoki.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Naoki. I used to be in the NPA until I moved to Scotland this year, and so I'm no longer there anymore. But just having an insight in kind of what's going on in both countries, like in the UK and in France, I feel like, I don't know. It might be because Justine, like you're in the fight right now, in the struggle, so it's a bit difficult to like look at the more positive side of things. But like, I know, for example, in my home uni in Toulouse, like there's a lot of organizing going on, good attendance in the general assemblies. There's also an occupation as well. So, and my friends there, they're all saying it's going great. So like, and whereas here to organize things in the UK is very difficult, I find. So in that sense, like I just wanted to say, like a bit of courage, like give you a bit of de la force, un peu de la force. And yeah, so like a lot of the questions that people were asking here about, like is there a way to do referendums or through elections and things like that? Personally, I'd say it would be very difficult because of how the Constitution is written, because this Constitution was written by, basically a general during the 50s that was dealing with like a civil war. So there's a lot of power that goes into the executive powers. And so to be able to, I don't know, have a counterbalance from it will be very difficult. So that's why, like, a lot of the reformist parties, especially like La France Insoumise and the Communist Party, they're pushing for referendums, but I feel like it wouldn't work as much. And so I do also join Justine in the calls for like massification of strikes, because so there's three main unions in France. There's La CGT, which is the historically bigger one, and then you have La CFDT. So they're the one that are a bit, you have to keep an eye on them, because they might sign whatever the government gives them. So but they're still with us right now, so that's good. And then you have Solidaire, who are more inclined to massify the movement. And so I feel like there needs to be like an encouragement on that part. And so I just had a question, because I remember back when I was in the party, like the party line really was, you can join a union, but like, and like help out, but like don't really take command. I don't know how to say it, but like for example, it's something that, for example, Révolution Permanente didn't really like, because they were like, we had to form our own things and like, push it forward. So like I was wondering if there's, because of the situation that's going on with especially la grève perlée and all of that, if the MPA has changed a bit of tactics or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Naoki, and welcome to Scotland. I'm not in Scotland, but so yeah, Naoki. Sorry,
sorry. Can I just please? I will just ask a question in French to Naoki, just to be sure I understood his question. Oui, c'est juste, je demande si par rapport au NPA, comment dire, enfin, en gros, est-ce que, parce que toi, de ce que tu disais, c'est que nous, notre ligne, c'est de pas prendre la direction des syndicats.
Non, mais c'était parce que tu vois, enfin moi quand j'y étais en tout cas, c'était comment dire ça, genre c'est plutôt c'est pas de l'accompagnement, mais C'est genre, tu vas pas s'imposer, quoi. Ça va pas s'imposer sur...
Ok, d'accord, j'ai compris.
Genre,
D'accord.
voilà.
Okay, go ahead,
okay.
Justine. You're muted. You're muted.
Yes, about this last question. Just like, so yeah, so our position is not to impose ourselves in the union, but by our actions, we think that we can be convincing. Like people would believe that our action and our position is good, and so with this, then we hope that people would believe in the general strike and so on, and so and in self-organization, and so we still believe in this, and it's still our position. It hasn't changed. But on your question on the comparison with the other far left-wing organization like Révolution Permanente, which is for like just to explain to the other comrades, Révolution Permanente is like a group which is actually it comes from Argentina. It's a Morenist, Moreno.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it's a Morenist organization which actually did entrism in the NPA, and they go bigger, and then they left it in the NPA last year. And their position about the unions would be like the direction of the trade unions would betray all the time, and we never trust in them, and so they would criticize them like all the time, and we would be like more that sometimes it's not useful to always criticize them, and you need to, for example, say it's a good thing that they're still united after 3 months of mobilization. Because when you talk about the unions to the people, you need to be like if you should not be too sectarian about the mass organization, and this is why sometimes we say that we try to not criticize too much, openly criticize them, the trade unions, but still opposition is still like, yes, it's not necessarily in the interest, but the basis push for general strike or whatever. So that's one question. And you also write, Naoki, about the comparison between France and other countries. Sometimes we forget that in France we have big social movements all the time. Some are stronger than others. Like for example, this one is much bigger than the other ones, but still it's much bigger than, for example, the comrades in Switzerland or in other country where it's really, really small. So yeah, it's more like what I try to explain is that compared to other social movements, the youth movement is weaker. Well, maybe not weaker, but it's not as big as it could be compared to other movements. Like for example, in 2016, you had a reform on the working condition, which was also a social movement that was quite important. And it's actually the moment when I joined the NPA, for the anecdote. And in this moment, you had like massive general assembly in the universities. You had like a massive part of the demonstration that was from only of young people, and young people were organized, on themselves, not with all the others. They were not spreading everywhere. They were like really like this organization of young people, and you don't have this in this movement. But still, you're right that in some universities you will have occupation, in some others you will have blockades. But when you have this, then it wouldn't massify the movement as much as it could be. Once again, you would have some people who join, but not like hundreds or thousands of people who join the movement. So yes. And about the first question about this organized force, which is something enthusiastic. Well, we can be enthusiastic about this organized force of people joining the unions, and you're completely right. And I think that actually is something. Well, to be honest, I don't think we will win this movement, but I think it's a movement that will be useful for the future, because you have all these people who never did politics before and who actually join organizations like unions, and because they join them, then I think like by the fact they will understand why it is useful to be in a trade union or in a party or whatever, but to be organized, and then they will learn, you know, all the things that we know as activists, like how you organize an assembly, how you go on strike, and what are your rights and what you can do, and so all of this. So I think for the future it will be really useful. But for this movement, I think it would take too much time to be directly useful. I'm not sure if I'm clear, but I don't think we will have counterpower in this movement. But maybe in the future we will have it if we don't have the far rights before. But yes.
No, we are seeing this in Britain as well, with people joining unions. As the unions come on strike, people are joining unions. And the teachers' unions recruited 50,000 members as it was coming into strike. You know, now it's 500,000 members. So we see that a new generation in Britain of class struggle activists, of trade union activists, is being born, because, you know, strikes are happening over basic things, you know, working conditions and pay. Okay, so any other questions? People are very quiet, but well, maybe we should make an announcement and people can come back again, right? So Justine is a member of the Anticapitalist Youth in France, and every year there's an international youth camp, right, which is going to be in France, I think. So I think somebody in the room here wants to say something about it. Is it Susan, or is it Naoki? I'm not sure. So I've seen in the chat somebody wants to make an announcement about it. No? Susan, are you here?
I can do it. I was hoping Naoki would, so but I'll do it. Yes, we'll have the old woman present it. Basically, let me just press that. I just put the themes in there. The youth camp is happening in France this summer. It is the period of July 22nd to the 29th. And if there are any young comrades, 30 or under usually, but if exceptions can be made, for those close to that age, please send an email to info@anticapitalistresistance.org. It's inside the chat. And I've also put in the each day, there's 6 days, there's 6 themed days. And so we can see them. The first one is against capitalism. The only alternative is eco-socialism. Organizing the feminist fight back against the neoliberal and reactionary offensive. Anti-racism at the heart of the anti-capitalist fight. LGBTQI plus struggles, a necessity for our lives and for the revolution, and wars, economic and political crises, social movements in the world, and then strategy and party. So they were all in the chat. And please, if you are interested in going or can think of anybody who would really enjoy doing this, please contact the email that I put into the chat. I've heard very good reports. In fact, I'm jealous that I'm way too old to not attend this. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. But if Naoki or Justine wants to say anything more about the camp, then you're very welcome to say something. But
well, it's just,
okay.
It's just like this youth camp is like, it's really, as you said, Susan, it's really rich, like the discussion are rich, the educational are rich. You discuss with all the comrades from, like, it should be all around the world, but it's mainly Europe this last year because of COVID and the economic situation. But still, it's really interesting to have this discussion with the people and they would explain what's going on in the country, in what struggle they take part in. Like we discuss on what should be the next important struggle we should lead. What is the situation about the far right, about what's going on in Ukraine, in every places. So it's really, and all this with also, how to say it, like, you know, you also make parties and stuff in the night, so it's fun. It's interesting and it's fun.
Okay, great, thank you. Any more questions? So look, remember, if you know anybody or if you're in this meeting and you're interested in going, info@anticapitalistresistance.org, get in touch with us and we'll help organize travel there, you know, and sponsorship and so on and so forth. So we've been sending delegations for quite a while from Britain and in Scotland in particular. Okay, so I can't see anybody else wants to come in. Justine, do you want to say any concluding remarks you want to make before I make a couple of other announcements? Anything you forgot to say?
No, I just put a joke in the chat, but yeah, no, it's just like once again, thanks for the invitation, and I think it would be interesting to, like, we didn't have much opportunity to discuss and to compare what's going on in Britain and what's going on in France, but I hope we will have it in the future or whatever. But yeah, I think there is something like in this last months, you had something going on in Britain, you had something going on in France, in Greece, in several countries, and I think it's like the indication that there is a sort of crisis in neoliberalism and capitalism, and so we have to think on how we act about it as, you know, revolutionaries. What is our strategies in this situation? Because actually there are a lot of common points in our countries, and so yeah, we have hope in the future.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Justine. I mean, it was a brilliant introduction. I think it gave us a lot of flavour and a lot of information and food for thought about our, you know, what's in common with our struggles and what's also different as well. So a reminder about the big one, as it's called, the big mobilisation for climate this weekend, Friday and Saturday. Saturday, in particular, we'll have our broadsheet, which Rob showed, and hopefully we might even have our books on, or a few books at least, on eco-socialism, not extinction, just £5. You can go onto the Anti-Capitalist Resistance website to look at our books, or even better, our publishing house, which is resistancebooks.org. Lots of good stuff to buy there and read. And Anti-Capitalist Resistance is not just a place to meet and exchange ideas, and we've got a great website, but it's also an organisation of revolutionaries, eco-socialists, feminists, anti-racists, fighting for against this rotten neoliberal system. So if you liked what you hear tonight, or you want to discuss with us, and, you know, work with us and join us, then, you know, yes, that'd be great if you thought about that. Just one announcement I've got to make. One of my areas of campaigning is Ukraine solidarity, and there's a meeting in London on Monday with an academic called John Paul Himka at 7 p.m. near King's Cross about the relevance of what does the history of Ukraine teach us for today. He's a fascinating guy. Just one piece of good news, actually. I mean, as many people know, that the left is very divided on Ukraine. Most of the left organisations, the Communist Party, Socialist Workers' Party, Counterfire, etc., have a position of peace now, don't send arms. They do say Russian troops out, but they're never seen outside the Russian embassy. But the good news is that the Scottish Trade Union Council, the Scottish TUC, voted a position of solidarity with Ukraine and support for the resistance, which is very good news indeed. So, you know, and there's some more union conferences coming up. The University Colleges Lecturers Union, the PCS, the Public and Civil Services Union conference is coming up, where motions are coming up, which we hope will be endorsed, or at least will make a big splash. So there you are. Thank you for coming again tonight. Go to our website, keep in touch with us, join us in our mobilisations, and see you at our next meetings or the next demonstration. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.